Theories of learning part 2, or you can even call it classical conditioning learning by associations. Now let's see. Now if you haven't watched the last video, I will recommend you to watch the last video because we discussed about the introduction of this theory called classical conditioning learning by association. You might be able to see a black pop-up on the upwards part of your screen. It will lead you to that video. Now let's get to this video. Classical conditioning learning by associations. Now this image, we will not talk about it right now. We will see this in the end. Now, classical conditioning learning by association. Now, let's see the experiment. As I told you in the last video, we'll be discussing about a famous experiment conducted by Ivan Pavlov in this video. Now, before moving further, we should see the famous experiment done by Ivan Pavlov. His experiment on dog laid the foundation of classical conditioning. Pavlov, a physiologist by profession, was working on the process of digestion in dog around 1889. Now these points, first 3 points are kind of background. You have to remember these things such as name, like who conducted this experiment, and what this his experiment did for classical conditioning, like it laid the foundation of it, and who was Ivan Pavlov, what was his profession, when did he conduct this experiment, like not exactly, but he was studying the process of digestion in dogs. So when was that? Around 1889. Now from here important part starts from the fourth point. While measuring the rate of salivation, he observed that his dogs start salivating when they smell the food or even at the sight of their empty food pan. He conducted a study. This study was conducted in two trials. Now, let's see the fourth point again. While measuring the rate of salivation. Now, what was he doing? He was studying the process of digestion in dog. Then, obviously, he was studying about salivation as well. Rate of salivation he observed. Now, he observed the rate of salivation that his dogs start. Then he noticed that his dogs they start salivating when they smell the food or even at the sight of their empty food pan. He conducted a study after that. This study was conducted in two trials. He called his first trial conditioning trial. During this trial, he presented a neutral stimulus, a bell, that had no effect on salivation. A bell. The ringing bell was followed by an unconditioned stimulus, food, that can produce dog salivation. The response the dog gave after getting food in the form of salivation is known as unconditioned response. The ringing of bell was followed by an unconditioned stimulus, food, that can produce dog salivation. Now, as we saw in the last slide, in the starting of this experiment, the dog salivates when it sees the food or he sees the empty food pan. Now, what he did was he first rang the bell and then he showed that dog the food, the unconditioned stimulus. The food is called unconditioned stimulus, which can produce dog salivation. The response the dog gave after getting the food in the form of salivation is known as unconditioned response. Now, the food is called unconditioned stimulus, and the response which the dog gave by producing saliva or having that salivation, it is called unconditioned response. You have to remember these terms because it did not depend on previous learning. This pairing of the ringing of the bell and the food was done for multiple times. After this multiple times, the bell acquired the characteristics of UCS. Now, what is UCS? UCS is unconditioned stimulus. Now, what is unconditioned stimulus? Food. So what it is saying is that after multiple times pairing the bell with the food, this kind of as we saw in the first point, he rang the bell and then he showed the food and all. So he did that for a couple of times, like multiple times, and after this multiple time, that bell, it acquired the characteristics of unconditioned stimulus. It acquired the characteristics of food, you can say. And how did that happen? Now, when it acquired the characteristics of unconditioned stimulus such as food, the dog started salivating um, just by the voice of bell, or just by seeing the bell, or when the bell was ring, he started salivating. Finally, Pavlov's dog started giving conditioned response. It started to salivate on the sound of the bell only. Because why it did that? Because as it mentions that the bell acquired the characteristics of UCS, unconditioned stimulus, and that is the reason why his dog started salivating just by the sound of bell only. Now, the neutral stimulus used by Pavlov in this experiment was termed as conditioned stimulus. Now, let's see the image actually. Classical conditioning. Before conditioning, now you can just take some moment, and now I just actually we both of us read the whole topic, and I just explain you all the things. Now you can just pause the video and actually observe this image because there's nothing to explain. It's just what I just explained to you. Now, if I were to talk about this before conditioning, the neutral stimulus, the that is the bell, and if you see the dog there, in the first image, which is where, let me point it out, such as this. Now when you see the dog here, the dog is not focusing on the bell, which is the neutral stimulus, but as soon as you brought the unconditioned stimulus, which is the food, it started to salivate. Now during conditioning, at the time of conditioning, they combined this both, and then dog started salivating. First they ring the bell, and then they showed the food, and then they did a couple of times, and then just by now just like this, just like this, after just seeing the bell or hearing the bell, it started salivating. This is the difference. Now you can watch this image as I told you by pausing the video. I'll give you some time to take the screenshot. I would recommend you to watch this, and not watch this, but actually take screenshot of this all slides and read it again, actually, because you have to remember these names such as unconditioned stimulus. In the next video, we'll be talking about these terms, just what is neutral stimulus, what is unconditioned stimulus, and what is conditioned stimulus, all that in a little bit depth. This video was all about experiment. Now I'll give you some time to take the screenshot. Now I'll see you guys in the next video, in which we will be talking about all those stimulus and all that words which we talked about in this, important words such as UCS and all that, in the next video in a little bit depth. And as always, as I always recommend you to subscribe to the channel and on the bell icon to stay notified. And also like the video if you love the video. Feel free to comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, if you want to leave a like, you can leave a like.